my question is like, to what extent is the novel autobiographical? Like, how much are you yourself trying to reconcile those two things, or were you trying to reconcile those two things, and is that reflected in the text?
How autobiographical? I mean, it's pretty autobiographical. I mean, like, aspects of it are quite autobiographical, and aspects of it are not. So, and it, like, I started, certainly started the book with this year that I actually did spend with my grandmother, and then, started thinking, I kind of wrote things down as more or less as they happen, and then I was like, is that interesting? And it wasn't. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to change this and that to make it more compelling and kind of amp up some of the emotional aspect. But certainly the kind of character's relationship to Russia and his parents and all that stuff is basically autobiographical. I've answered your question, but I will keep talking. I have a previous novel, which All the Sad Young Literary Men. This one was better, but that one, I guess one of the characters, it's about three guys, and it's kind of they're not really interwoven, but they're kind of three separate stories. But one of those guys is Russian, and so there's some of that same kind of immigrant kind of conversation about what it means to be an immigrant, and but those stories were written the latest out of that book. And so you mentioned Steingart, right? I mean, for me as a writer, I kind of never wanted to be a Russian American writer. I never thought of myself really that way. As a journalist, I very much did, right? I mean, the first piece of journalism I did was I went and I found these like former Soviet dissidents who had settled in the U.S. and I somewhat obnoxiously, as like a young person, was like, well, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. Why haven't you gone back? Right? And they were like, now I'm like, of course they didn't go back. But at the time I was like, you were anti-Soviet and you wanted, communism to collapse. Well, communism has collapsed. What are you still doing here? In your like suburban American lives, you losers. So as a journalist, I kind of knew that was my kind of a comparative advantage, like that I knew Russian and that I had access to, the emigre community, but also when I could go back to Russia and speak to people. That's always been what I've done as a journalist. But as a fiction writer, I kind of thought that I wanted to just kind of write about like the people that I knew, right? And they were my kind of contemporaries, and most of my friends are not actually Russian. Like that's kind of not my. I have some very good friends who are, but like most of my friends are not. And it was actually weirdly reading Steingart when that book came out. The first one, it was like 2001, 2002.
2002, like a Russian day.
Yeah, or maybe even 2000. I was like already kind of, I was like in my 20s. I was already like writing fiction, and I was like, oh, you can make fiction out of this like weird, very specific. Are you guys immigrants?
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
You're not. Yeah. I mean, I just always found it to be like I had thought of it as being so specific and kind of boring, and not like something that other people would be interested in, right? And I find it embarrassing that I thought that. Now I find it ridiculous and dumb. But it took reading Steingart to kind of open, to be, and it took, and then I was like, well, I don't want to do that, I want to be an American writer, and then I started writing this book, and I was like, oh, actually, I kind of want to look into that stuff a bit more, and I find it interesting, and
So to add to this question, I was particularly interested if the political parts towards the end of the book are autobiographical, or like the arrest, because I read that you were arrested during the Occupy movement.
Yes.
So.
I did actually get arrested in Russia once.
Oh, okay.
In Sochi, I was like covering the mayoral election when Nemtsov was running for mayor of Sochi in 2009, and I like didn't, my hotel like didn't register me, and then like I ended up at like a there's a guy named Yashin. Is that somebody you know? Ilya Yashin. He was like
from Masha's book.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, an incredibly irritating person who, when the election happened, he was Nemtsov's campaign chairperson, and he started like the night of the election. He started going around to polling places and just like yelling at people, and just being horrible. And I like came with him, and anyway, he was at one of these places yelling at people, yelling at them so much that they called the police. And I would have too, actually, in there. Interesting guy. Anyway, and they showed up, and I wasn't registered. So I got arrested, and that, so it was a very different situation, but like that definitely helped me kind of know what that feeling was like, of being in a room where you can't leave. And I did actually sell out my hotel, which I always felt bad about. Like, I should have just been like, you're not getting anything out of me. And I was like, they were like, why aren't you registered? And I was like, my hotel didn't register me. And anyway, but like, no, it wasn't quite like selling out my friends.
That kind of, selling out your friends,
But this is actually how, how your like kind of boring life gets turned into fiction.
I was thinking my other favorite book this year was The Sellout. What a perfect title also.
Yes, it's a good title.
But since you started talking about that Andrei basically sells out his friends, but is that obvious to everyone? Just because he's talking? Because I feel like sometimes people find themselves in these situations where, it's murky. What is right and what is wrong.
Right.
And since he is just talking, to me also, it's not 100% clear that what he's doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Did you guys, when you read the end, did you think, okay, he's totally selling out his friends? How dare he talk about them? Did that seem wrong to you? No.
I just thought he kind of got bored into the
trap.
Yeah,
kind of.
Sorry?
You also read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I told you.
Oh, that's right. Yes, thank you.
To me, the whole episode was just a metaphor for what the book seems to be saying in general, that if you're not from this place, you shouldn't really insert yourself into the place, or you risk terrible misfortunes to fall on your head and the heads of your friends.
Right.
And this person ultimately remains not from there. And so he should tread very carefully, and he can't, or he won't, and he gets involved, and then that brings terrible consequences, although he means well. And the whole book to me just seemed like this cautionary statement: don't venture into this terrible country, or if you do, understand that you're an outsider.
And actually, I want to piggyback on that, because I thought the end was very similar. When he becomes complicit in whatever happens to his friends, it's also, he's repeating Baba Sieva's history, because when she accepts the apartment from Aunt Klava, Teta Klava, she's also becoming complicit in what happened, right? Because like when we talk about Russians who took people's apartments when people went to the gulags, or even the people who evacuated and then lost their apartments, isn't it the same as Jews losing their homes during the Holocaust and being unable to come back? So I don't know. Anyway.
I mean, I would, but another reading. From my perspective, if he, the real selling out, I mean, yes, he does that to his friends, and then he leaves, right? If he did that to his friends and then stayed, I think that would be a different kind of outcome. Like, he still has a choice to be like, okay, I screwed up, but I'm gonna stick around and see what happens, and kind of like stay with you, right? So I feel like he still has. It's not predetermined that he is. I mean, it's in a way he's going to screw things up. Yes. Because he doesn't understand everything, but that doesn't mean he also then has to like accept this fancy job.
But becoming an academic means so much that it also means selling out your friends just for that prize at the end.
Exactly. Yes. That's yes. Yeah, it is. I mean, I did have in mind. I mean, I love House on the Embankment.
Mhm.
You know, and I haven't read it. Have you guys read this House on the Embankment? Oh, it's this. Have you read? No. It's this wonderful short novella by Yuri Trifonov. It's from the '60s, and the kind of
I'm listening to the House of Government, which is
okay.
the House
Yes,
of the
right.
Embankment.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the Yuri Sleshkin wrote a whole book about this House of the Embankment,
Yes.
which this novella.
Yeah.
Yeah, novella is about.
Yeah, that
About
book's like
this-
1,000 pages.
Oh my
whereas
god, I've been
Trifonov-
listening to it for like eight months. This Yuri Sleshkin book,
Is
yeah.
that the
It's 48 chapters.
Is that the novel?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. It's much shorter than the Sliskin book. But in that book, I mean, I think it's a young man who's at the university who starts dating like his academic advisor's daughter. Sorry?
He said messy.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, this is, and it's kind of becomes part of the family, and then his academic advisor kind of gets in trouble with the authorities, and there's a meeting at which he's going to be denounced and basically kicked out of the university, I think. And then our main character, our narrator, doesn't show up, right? So he doesn't like go and denounce him, but he like doesn't show up. So it's this like very, it's. And that's what people used to do, right? Like it was gray. Like he didn't come and be like, yes, he's a terrible person. He just like didn't come, but he knew that he had betrayed him, right? And he stops dating his daughter, obviously. But also partly for kind of careerist reasons, right? Mm-hmm. He's like ashamed of himself, but also she's no longer the daughter of a successful professor. So I that kind of ambiguity or like kind of quiet betrayal of your friends I found very appealing. And also the Cossacks. I don't know if you guys remember, like, it's the same kind
That's the first short story that he's discussing with
Yes.
the students.
But also, I mean, that's a book that I kind of, like the plot is modeled partly on that book where like it's this Tolstoy figure who goes down to the south and kind of becomes enamored of the Cossacks and then kind of screws up and then leaves.
I think that makes this very much kind of like in the mold of the great Russian novel.
Thank you.
Yeah,
But shorter.
But shorter.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
No, I love that. I love like these big moral questions, and then you have to decide which side are you going to be on, of good or.
Yeah, I mean
or
the other source text is the Cherry Orchard.
I thought I noticed that. In the
Yeah.
Love the
There you
cherry
go.
Yeah,
orchard.
I love the cherry orchard.
Well, and so interestingly, I was like, I was thinking to myself, I was like, it's going to be a mixture of the Cossacks and the Cherry Orchard, right? And because the brother wants him to sell the apartment, right?
Yeah.
And I have a writing group, and it's just like 4 friends. We meet and kind of show each other our stuff. One of the guys in the writing group, he's really into theater, and I was explaining to him how this was going to be just like the Cherry Orchard, and the brother in which the brother makes him sell the apartment, right? And he's like, no, you're wrong. That's not what happens in the Cherry Orchard. And go read the Cherry Orchard again, And Lapachin, it turns out, he's a good guy.
What?
No, he's a good guy.
He's not a good guy.
Yes, he is.
He's not. Look, he's sterile, just like the Cherry Orchard. That's why he doesn't marry Vadia. Because
he's sterile?
Yeah,
Who says that? What
no one
interpretation
says that,
is
but
this?
it's sterility. Like the
Oh,
fact
like
that
he can't-
the cherry, they can't produce.
Okay.
And Lapachin to
That's
me.
not a bad. I mean, that's not.
But I think it is because Lapachin. I don't think anyone is good in that play because
Okay.
Lapachin doesn't. He won't marry Vadia because all he cares about is making money, and he doesn't care about the environment. You know, all these people,
No, but he wants to save their estate.
he wants to save the estate by cutting down the trees. He's an anti-environmentalist.
No, but he just wants they want to stay in the house, and he wants them to stay.
He's
No.
he's
See,
like
right?
all
See,
these
no.
horrible-
Well, in my rereading of it, Lepachin was giving them good advice, right?
No, I agree.
And they
it is
screwed
good
up.
Advice,
Well,
but-
in my memory, but I changed the book after
Yeah.
I read it because I was like, the brother should kind of, he should be pushing him to sell the apartment, but ultimately it's the narrator who makes the decision, right? And that helped. I thought that was good too. I mean, it kind of put more of the onus on him, and he's our guy. So. What else do you guys
that's
want to talk
great. What else did I have?
Well, you also lean kind of heavily on, I'm going to butcher the Russian pronunciations, Svetaeva and Akhmatova. The scenes where he's at the movie theater with his grandmother and watching the life story of Svetaeva.
Yeah.
And then she quotes Akhmatova afterwards. That's just like, I don't know, it just kind of seems to me to be a good blend of like Russian literary influences and showing how even like Russians, like literarily get their Russian influences all kind of, it's just vaguely there, you know?
Yeah. Well, she does have dementia.
Oh, and
It's okay. It's okay that she's quoting some female Russian poet who suffered from Stalin.
Yeah, I had a lot more of. Initially, I wanted to write a longer book that had all these like stuff like that, like where it would like interweave kind of literary history and I cut it. It was all boring, It just like didn't fit into the text, and like I was able to keep that because like they went to the movies, and it was in it, and then they had a fight, like so it was like part of the story.
Well, I think in the book when you compare, I guess, Solzhenitsyn and Shlomo, that was an interesting.
Varlam Shalamov.
Yeah, Shalamov.
Yeah.
And it also it connects to the ending because you were saying that Solzhenitsyn had the bad guys and the good guys, and there were people that in the other stories you see that everyone's trying to survive, and so that's what in the end I guess Andrei is doing. So he defends I guess his position originally. At least that's what I've seen.
I loved everything that you wrote about Shalamov. So we went with the students of this. Yeah, you were gonna say it.
Yeah, that it just
Go ahead.
came out the second time. That the other immigrant artist from Soviet Union also had mentioned him as a better writer about the Gulag and the lager experience.
We went to this amazing artist's home on Monday. This 79-year-old man that I've just recently become friends with. Now I'm obsessed with him. He's a Russian American artist. He immigrated in the 70s and 75, and his name is David Miretsky. And his paintings are naive expressionism. Yeah, and they're really amazing.
Of Russian immigrants. Former Soviet immigrants in Brighton Beach.
Yeah, it's really just so cool. So anyway, he's a super intellectual, and we just talked about books the whole time. And he showed them his studios and his apartment. So he showed them all, like so many of his paintings and his sketchbooks. But Varlam Shalamov is his favorite writer. He's obsessed with him, and he's got the collected, volumes of Varlam Shalamov, which is, I've never even seen the collected volumes of Varlam Shalamov in my life. I mean, on
purpose.
Yeah.
I've read like 1,000-page edition of Varlam Shalamov stories, but never saw even in any of these libraries, university libraries. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting because that was kind of, I guess, preparing us. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but this idea that everyone's just trying to survive.
Oh, wow.
And I guess like the justification for Andrei's actions in a way, including the conversation with his grandmother where she asked him if it was the right thing to do, and he says he Or that he excuses as, well, you didn't take her in, and I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't thinking of that, but that's great.
But do you like him more than Solzhenitsyn?
Yeah, I mean, I could make a counter case, but certainly there's something very appealing about Shalamov. I mean, the counter case I think is Shalamov is more recognizable as a Western type writer, who is like, taking experience and turning it into an aesthetic object, right? Like these short stories, right? Whereas Solzhenitsyn is this more Russian figure, who's like,
I taught Matryona's Home in my earlier class today. Solzhenitsyn's short story. Matryona's Home. And and we had like an hour and a half discussion about the kolkhozes, and I have this one. So I teach at this all African American CUNY also at Vancouver Evers, and one of my students is from one of the Caribbean islands. So he's completely like, communism is is so great. The means justifies the end.
Wow.
Oh my God! Every time we got into it with Akhmatow's Requiem, the means justifies the. He does not say that about the Holocaust, but anything having to do with the Soviet experience, sure, means justify the end. 8 million, Ukrainians dying of famine. Yes, it was all worth it. So interesting.
But I think we also talk about it here with socialism in this book, that the students in America get excited about Marx, who's a Santa Claus.
That was funny.
Figure, which I feel like is true. I mean, I've taken so many intro classes, especially connecting to like the Soviet Union, where we read Marx or excerpts of it, and people get excited.
That's all they ever read, Americans, is excerpts of Marx. They never read the whole thing. So it's just like, you can't call yourself Marx.
And those are wonderful excerpts if you just take them separately, word for word, but you put them in the historical context.
Those are sculptures that they haven't taken down in the Soviet Union. You walk around,
of Marx.
There's still Marx and Engels sculptures everywhere. Like I know.
Better Marx than Stalin.
And I even remember where in St. Petersburg I saw it just recently on Marx.
But as you guys know from this book, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the Russian socialist cause, and I mean, actually, that is based on actually Kirill Medvedev, who is kind of the prototype for Sergei in the book. Will be at the Harriman Institute on Monday. If you guys want to come, I think we'll have him sing some songs. He's now and talk about Russian politics. That's a real, like, those are real people. And that's actually, like, there is this kind of revival of interest in socialism among young people in Russia, which I think is nice.
Yeah, no. We had another writer here. She's a professor in Arizona, Claudia Sandowski-Smith, and she wrote her book about...
New American Whiteness.
Right.
Or
so
New American Whiteness.
Yeah, basically about neoliberalism. Just the past. I mean, she talks about the last 20 years in Russia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. What? Sorry.
I had a question. Were there any difficulties for you when you were writing to, I guess, put it in English writing some of the Russian concepts or some of the experiences that you wanted to describe? Were there any challenges, something that you struggled with potentially, or something that was easy and believable?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're like Russian concepts. Certainly, like Russian exchanges, like actual, like stuff that had happened, and people had said something really funny that it was funny in Russian, and it's not going to be as funny in English. There is that kind of passage about Russian swear words, right? Which I people have read it and they kind of get it. They think it's funny. So that was nice, and I don't know. I mean, I had like things in there that I don't know, just people just. There was a great exchange that I saw my grandmother have with a cab driver once. pretty sure it's not in the book, but you'll tell me if it is, where she was like, they were, she's very liberal. She likes to listen to Echa Moskvi, and she also likes to talk to cab driver, which is in the book. And she's like, I listen to Echa Moskvi, right? And this driver, he's like Armenian. He's like, I listen to Radio Svoboda, Radio Free Europe. Это даже круче, right? Which means, it's hard to translate. Like it's cooler and it's like tougher.
More hip?
Well, it's
more like
more badass.
Yeah, it's more badass. Yeah. So he's like, you have your liberal station, I have like my even more liberal station, right? And I just thought that was hilarious, and I've kind of remembered that. But that was impossible to and I tried to write it a few times, and it just you couldn't communicate like how funny that whole thing was, So, yeah, it's the advantage of being, I'm not quite as naive or quite as Andre doesn't go there for 8 years or something, right? And I haven't had a gap of 8 years. But I did, there was a period where I think 2000 to 2002 to 2006 I didn't go. And actually that was the period where the real kind of wealth came into Russia for the first time.
When did you?
In 2002 to 2006.
Okay.
I remember coming in 2006 and having this kind of reaction that he has.
You were there in 2005.
I don't know what it was like then, but
yeah.
But just being surprised that people had cell phones and these German cars, that really happened quite quickly.
Yeah.
And being away for even 4 years at the time was enough to kind of be shocked.
And
right?
what was the first time you went back? You were in college, right? Or is that?
95. Yeah, like him.
95.
Yeah.
I went back in 98 the first time.
Mm.
It was
Interesting
also-
moment. Yeah. But very poor, right?
Very poor, and
Yeah.
I went back. I had the opposite of your story. I went back with my great aunt to bury my grand uncle because he was Russian. He wasn't Jewish, and he really didn't want to come here. I can't talk about it. Can't talk about it. Sorry, I'm gonna cry. He had leukemia, and he really didn't want to come here, but she made him come to get treated, and he just wanted to be there. So anyway, when he died, that's when I went back for the first time with her to bury him. And then she died a year later, and I went back to bury her. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was a. So writing the book, I was a little less naive than Andre, but I had, and one of the advantages of having that perspective is, both the narrator and me could notice things, right, that a Russian person would not notice. And so the book has this it's oh my God, the Russians do this and the Russians do that, right? And a Russian person just wouldn't, be of course we do that. And that's, but it is this kind of dual perspective, as you said, because he does know Russian, right? Which helps him actually understand what's going on.
Are his linguistic challenges your challenges, or is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting in the book. That I think it was one of the first stories where I guess the emphasis is put on how wealthy Russia has become, or at least Moscow, and what he has seen.
Yeah.
Because most of the time when we read something about
He also
traveling
lives
West
in the
Russia, it's
city
always
center.
about kind of derogatory or pointing out things that are really bad. And he does it here too, where it's kind of it's more comfortable in America with that. But I think it's more of a cultural thing for him, at least, with the hockey and other things, because everything else is then just unattainable because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
And it is kind of true for a lot of people that come back. Then you realize that if you want to live sort of similar lifestyle as you have here in the U.S., it costs triple or 4 times as much there, and it's also excessively expensive.
I remember.
Was that a conscious choice to kind of focus more on that? Russia is now different and rich, I guess, versus.
Oh yeah, I think, well, partly just for the reason you say. I think that's. People. We've always had some of that in the Western media portrayal, but not very much, right? And like still, I think most people kind of think of Russia as this kind of impoverished place, right? And like in certain profound ways, it is, and yet certainly like among the elites, right? It's not, including just basically Moscow, right? So I felt like that. I mean, a lot of this was stuff that I felt like I was trying to do as a journalist and couldn't like communicate, what like just how strange Russia is and how it's very much like here and also very different and like you really needed to get into like the kind of granular, like the grandmother like going from like the old Soviet grocery store to like the other and like that kind of stuff, which journalism isn't good for. Like it's kind of hard to imagine what a journalistic version of that would be, but the novel is pretty like congenial to that kind of day-to-day description. There's something else I wanted to say, picking up on your point, but maybe I can't.
Even just like the small details, like we have to buy our new pair of slippers because the Russians all wear slippers in their house. Like that's just like small things like that an American wouldn't know or wouldn't know to put in the novel. So like,
right.
Yeah, the slippers are definitely something that even carries over to here. And God, and my parents have, to this day. And when we came to David's house. The artist, the 79-year-old artist, he immediately gave Katya slippers. And he's been here for 40 years. No, wait, more. He came in 75.
73, I think he even said.
Well, 73 he was arrested. Yeah, you would get a kick out of him too. He was also arrested multiple times. If this is something
he was arrested the second time in 75, and that's what made him decide, okay, bye.
Yeah, for me, the mundane kind of human details really made those books stand out among so many books that talk about Russia yet from a political standpoint, this like, weird place, or just something really foreign and that we can't relate to. But this the slippers episode and the sink episode. The plumber is not going to show up. So he's got to. He's got to deal with the sink himself, and like it describes it as this saga, and then finally he's triumphant.
Yes, thank you. I was looking at the book the other day, and to me the more Russian thing is the fact that the first time he comes, he's like mad at Andre. Do you remember? He's like you should have fixed this yourself, you like idiot, and like it's very Russian. Like he,
to judge another man, like you're not manly enough. Look, you can't even screw in a light bulb. Yeah,
and you're like, I just, I paid you $50. You came here and I paid you good money, but like that's not the Russian mentality. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question about. You're right about all these people who are politically active, but my experience in Russia has been that I'm more have an experience with political apathy. I've had so many experiences of relatives who are just, completely fine with it, and like the propaganda works for them. And that is, I don't know, but albeit everyone I know is in St. Petersburg. So obviously if I went outside of the city, maybe I would meet all these people who are disaffected and unhappy. What do you feel about political apathy in Russia? I mean, Sergei seems to think that, you just got to get the workers involved, and once they see, that they're being ripped off, they'll wake up, but it doesn't, it's not going to happen.
Well, Andre says, like, or maybe Sergei says, I forget, but he says, like, someone says, like, they're so unused to political discussions that they're open to anything. So if you just, like, the college students that get paid to counter protest, and they just, like,
that's Sergei.
Sergei says if you just talk to them, they'll listen. Like,
I think that's true, actually. Like, there isn't, the Kremlin controls mass media, so there isn't a lot of like political dialogue. They have these kind of like Jerry Springer like kind of political talk shows where like people like where you have like a Western person that gets yelled at by the nationalists. But in terms of like, I've seen workers, like, there is this kind of memory of communism that's functioned in this interesting way where, for example, so there was this, during the financial crisis, this was during this period, there was a mono town called Pikalova, which was near Petersburg, and Deripaska owned the factory, and he was going to close it because he was in financial trouble, and it was a money losing factory, and they went out to the highway and stood in the highway so people couldn't get to Petersburg, and it was like a big national story, and then Putin intervened and forced Deripaska to keep the plant open, and it was on TV, and he made Deripaska it was like this big show. He made him sign a contract to keep it open, and then he's like, give me back the pen. It's like a famous Putin episode. He's like, don't steal my pen. You've stolen everything. You don't also steal my pen, right? And people love that. That's why people love Putin. Yeah. And I went there. I went to Pikalova, and it was this. It was just really fast. It was this very small town, very Soviet. It was 5-story buildings. They had a house of culture where they had a disco. The head of the union was this woman who'd been working there a long time, and she was just great. And we were talking to her in her office, and she's like, yeah, we went out, we protested, and we defended our rights. And then her deputy comes in, and he's she was quite articulate, but this guy comes in, and he's a simple worker who works at the cement factory or whatever, and he's he talks to us for a little while, and then he's like, okay, I gotta go, this part of the plant is playing this other part of the plant in soccer, and we have our soccer game, it was just very Soviet, right? It was exactly as it had been set up in the Soviet Union, and people are walking through the town in their strollers. It wasn't a collapsed city. It was a Soviet city that was actually kind of being still subsidized by this oligarch, and so their kind of consciousness of their rights as workers were kind of left over from being in this kind of Soviet situation. So even though the Soviet Union's kind of long ago, there's still all this stuff and it's it can be mobilized there's still 20% of the populace votes for the Communist Party, right? And some part of that is the Stalinist anti-Semites, right? But some part of that is people who are workers should be paid a living wage. They'd be Bernie people.
Yeah. So if you combine those 20% with the 10%, that's the other 10% that's anti-Putin.
Yeah, you'd have 30%.
Yeah, you have 30%. I think about this country. We have free press, right? We really do, and yet still, who controls the government at least now. And even when, the left kind of controlled it under Obama, it was just him. And for 6 years, the Senate and Congress, he only had Congress and Senate for 2 years.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. The political apathy or no political apathy, people are really engaged here. That doesn't mean the left takes over.
Right. Unfortunately.
Okay. What did you guys have more? I obviously have a lot of questions.
I have a question. It might just be a flat no, but your sister Masha's book that came out last year, her main kind of thesis was that Putinism works by squashing the liberal arts in Russia, and so was that kind of at play at all when you were writing? Because I was telling Anna that I had a grim vision of my future as a future academic. We'll look through the character's struggle, so I don't know.
I had certainly not read my sister's book when and we do have different ideas about how what Putin is, for example.
Yeah, because her book really seems to be, it doesn't speak out against neoliberalism, whereas yours does. Yeah, so hers it doesn't. There's nowhere in the book where she talks, where the voice is kind of against these market reforms, right? Or
Right.
whatever happened to all these pensioners who lost their money. Yeah.
That's true.
No, it's actually more or less positive about them.
Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
it quotes Gaidar directly.
Gaidar, yeah,
In
exactly.
quite a few places, so it's neutral to positive, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Gaidar is portrayed in a very positive light.
Mm-hmm.
Versus all these pensioners, whenever they think about what happened to their money, they'll say, "My God, Gaidar is the root of all evil."
Yeah.
But that's what Andre also says, is that I think in the book that he realized now thinking about it that the reforms, or I think it was Sergei, whoever was saying that the reforms was the reason for some of the misfortunes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Was that Sergei?
I think Julia says that.
Everybody says it.
Particularly that we were talking about the reforms in there, and that the grandparents had suffered, or in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I was listening to your interview about when you went to Ukraine, and I think you said that your grandmother was happy that her savings disappeared. Or am I crazy? I swear, just listen to this. That she was like, "Oh, it's okay because I knew what I was in for." Did I just imagine this?
Well, that doesn't quite sound right. I mean, I think she was certainly happy the Soviet Union fell apart.
Okay, yeah.
And she was. Well, I mean, this is her, right? I mean, she. She hated the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah.
So she was a supporter of Gaidar and Yeltsin. That was her team. But then I think, looked at objectively, right? Subjectively, she may have enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But actually, she was screwed.
She was screwed.
Yeah. That's what initially this book was kind of, again, it was like a longer book with all these essays in it, and I always wanted to have like the socialism stuff in it, right? But it was when I realized I could cut out all the essays and just kind of have the grandmother be the person who is screwed by the reforms, right? And in a kind of interesting way, because she supports them, right? As opposed to being like most of the people who got screwed by the reforms, opposed them. That kind of clarified things. It's basically like, and then like Andre can have this, he can be like, wait a second. And they keep talking about neoliberalism, like, what is that? And then he's like, it's what happened to my grandmother. That's what it is.
So that's also circular, because she's the one who loses her dacha because of Rus oil, and then he also goes to jail because of Rus oil.
Yes, Rus oil is everywhere.
Well, his brother was in Rus's business, or almost goes to jail.
They made me take an S out. Right? It's Rus oil, right? In the book?
It's RUSS.
Yes?
RUSS oil. And I looked it up. I was looking up to see if it's a real company. There is a Rus oil, apparently. I know.
There was something we had to change where...
Maybe in real life it only has one S.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that... Oh, no, it's not. There's Rosneft.
Okay.
Which is just called Rosneft, and then there's Lukoil, and it was like I was trying to, I was thinking of like Rosneft.
But there is some Rus oil. I was looking it up.
Yes, and then they made me change something because but it's like new, and they were like, by the way, this thing, and you have to change it, and I was like, that's not fair, Anyway.
Well, that's fiction, right? It anticipates life.
That's right.
That's great fiction.
Thanks, guys.
I just wanted to comment that I read your piece in the New Yorker about your son and bilingualism right after reading this book. There are so many parallels, and it said that people who come over at the age of like 6 become American, and then the cutoff is 10 for Russians, and then from that point on, like they stay Russian. Yeah. And in that book, like Andre is the American and Dima's the Russian. Like it flat out says that, and then the ambivalence about going back that you talk about with your son. You're not sure that you want him to go there. You're not sure that you want to bring him to such a horrible place.
Yes.
But I love that, and that's a question that we always ask. Yeah, we always ask, and I've been at whenever we have writers, we always ask to that you really want your child to learn Russian. But from that article, I also saw that.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I do,
because
but I'm
you've
not
been
sure why. Yeah.
You're not sure. But you've been going to those meetups. That's what you wrote in the article. You were going to a Russian meetup and bringing
The
your
songs.
Oh yes, I went to that, and he's going to the Park Slope
Yes.
Russian school. He
Oh,
enjoys
okay.
it a lot. He yes.
Oh my God,
Oh,
And-
yeah.
And once in a while, like we'll run into someone, and he'll be like, "I speak Russian." He'll just like tell them, even though his active vocabulary is quite small. Yes. And you're teaching your kids Russian.
Yes.
Yes.
I am too, but Kat is doing a much better job of it.
Yeah. Is your husband Russian?
He's American,
Yeah.
but my kid is also going to Russian school on the weekends.
At Park
One
Slope?
of my kids. No,
Oh.
not that. He goes to something that Katya also found
Mm.
for me.
That's it.
Oh, I
It's
wrote
a-
to you about it.
It's on the Avenue U. It's
Oh,
called
jeez.
Monica
Oh,
Campagna.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really far south.
Yeah. I have to drive. Yeah. But it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but I also feel
Your
like
kid doesn't hate you for making him give up his weekends.
It's only 2.5 hours,
Oh.
and
yeah, but also like it's not like they have a. I mean, how old are your kids?
I have an 8 and a 4-year-old.
Oh,
Right.
no.
They don't have like it's not. They're not
Yeah.
17-year-old.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No,
On Sundays at the Met, I see some of the Russian groups.
Yeah, there is. Yeah,
We do that.
We've done that too. But there's an
I still listen sometimes.
yeah, there's this whole Kuznetsov family that
Yes.
they do these art classes.
Yes.
But then there's a really cool girl in Brooklyn, Ася Gribov, who does them at the Brooklyn Museum.
And there's now a Russian theater series, like real theater,
Uh-huh.
on the Upper West Side.
Oh.
A series
Great.
of plays.
Yeah, the Upper West Side is strong. The Upper East Side is strong.
Yeah.
South Brooklyn. Oh, and you are.
I'm a Russian, but I'm from Uzbekistan.
Mhm.
I immigrated here when I was 16, so kind of
Uh-huh.
like my brother. But I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know if I feel. I don't feel Russian because I'm from Uzbekistan, so
Yeah.
it's a little different. Although ethnically I am.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of
Interesting.
confusion and
Yes.
that. But yeah.
And are you guys graduate students?
I'm a second-year Harriman student.
Uh huh.
I'm a first-year student in Jewish studies.
And that was the interesting part, like you mentioned that here you write that at 6, and 16 the difference. But I feel like actually Dima was the one who was more, I guess, successful in a way, or he was more fluid with his identity, or it didn't bother him. He was able to hold on, I guess, to the Russian identity while living in London and being sort of okay with that, and going back and forth. While Andrei, who was more American and I guess or should be more comfortable, was the one who was lost both in America and in Russia.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, having written the book and then kind of having to think about it some more. Like, I feel like my parents were never like, "Who am I?" They're like, "We're Russian Jews who came to America and now we live here." And we're citizens. We like it. Like they were never like, "Who? What am I? Am I Russian? Am I American?" That's like the next generation is the one that's like, has all these neuroses or whatever. But I also feel like they actually passed down this kind of ambivalence about Russia to me, and I think I talk about it in the article, and in the book a little bit, like they loved all these things about Russia and remained culturally, attached to Russia, but they hated, the Soviet Union and they kind of hated Russians. I mean, the anti-Semitic stuff.
Oh, that's I wanted to ask about that. That's the in your novel. It's the first time that I've read about post-Soviet anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it hasn't appeared in any of the other works that we've read. I mean, people talk about it in the Soviet Union, but this I completely related to Andrei when he says, "Oh, my grandmother, she's just fantasizing." Of course, those ladies are not anti-Semitic. And then he has that experience. That was great.
Thank you.
And then the Nazis show up at the or they're at least Nazis for the photo op at least.
Yes.
It seemed like a kind of shallow anti-Semitism in that other. I mean, the old women hated Jews, but the Nazis that show up, they're just there taking selfies, just throwing up the sea pile. So it's just
Yeah, that actually happened. We were having a little seminar,
Yeah.
and these Nazis showed up.
So October is real?
Yeah,
Oh wow.
I mean, it's not called October.
It's not called October.
Yeah, it used to be
yeah.
called
But I love that idea of like the free university and that was great.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's amazing. But at the same time, he's also Sergei is also not pure because he has to sacrifice his family, right, in order to do that. So it's not. It's also kind of a moral question, right? What are you abandoning your kid?
Yep.
Your kid is gonna grow up in a single parent household, so you could just go pursue your revolutionary dreams. That's also kind of
Yeah. Thank you.
crappy.
Thank you.
I wish I had dog-eared the page, but one of my favorite passages is when Andre, his little internal monologue, is talking about having a second immigration. Because when they come to America, all of their parents' friends, their dentists, everybody is Russian.
Oh yeah, no, I have it. I know what page that's on actually.
Yeah.
It's on page 103.
And so that, I think, was really interesting, especially in light of having read...
Oh, I remember it, yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's read it. Especially in light of, Vesmogis's Natasha, I feel like that theme is really heavily addressed, except that's set in Canada. But same thing.
Do you want to just read a couple of sentences?
But we also have discussed that with David, the artist, that he said that this is the culture, or I guess what he's depicting is dying out, the Russian or Soviet American immigrants, and who he's depicting, because their children, he says now, are American. So what he's depicting is kind of a dying culture.
Yeah. No, it's
interesting.
and that's
Even
what we're
knowing
talking
that I am American.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is striking how when you see an old Soviet person, near Prospect Park, you just immediately know, and I'm not quite sure what it is.
It's a way of walking,
Yeah,
a way of shuffling your feet.
Yes.
Just the way, the way that, he's depicted it. It's really, I want to show you this man's paintings, because it's really,
What's
and
his name?
especially David Miretsky.
Okay.
David Miretsky.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but it's
Sounds
especially
great.
in the notebooks, you saw all these old Russian grandmothers, with skalyaskami, with their not walkers, but the shopping carts.
Yeah. That's right. Yes,
Brooklyn,
not walkers. Yeah.
And I showed him. I was like, I love this, and he thought. So all of his paintings, the people in them look like, the Botero, the Colombian artist who paints all these bigger people.
Okay. Yes. Uh-huh.
So Miretsky's, that's his. All his people he paints are bigger, right? They have girth, and so he thought it was making fun because he had this Russian lady from the back. But no, I was just laughing because it was it's so lovingly portrayed and something I know so well, and reminds me of my grandparents who died here or whatever. My grandmother, it looked like that. Are you finding it? Yeah, you're gonna try to find them. Yeah.
Sorry, we haven't talked about Yulia at all. Isn't she the only uncompromised person morally? She's the only one that really sticks to her morals. Even Andre said things
I think
too
Moody's
much
about
so.
it too.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, she's like my ex-wife. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the line where you say about her that she married Sergei because it was the only way to
And gave her what she wanted or something like that.
That he wasn't gonna run out on her. He wasn't something about.
Wasn't gonna disappoint
he
her,
wasn't going to disappoint her.
Yeah.
Well,
I
if she
wanted
has a child, he would disappoint her, right? Then he's gonna run away again.
Yeah.
She's able to avoid the temptation of the city and not look at the fancy cafes and just ignore all the wealth and just stick to her convictions.
She finally has someone who will not let her down.
That's a great line.
But you're right. If they have a child, we'll see. We'll see.
But there will be a sequel.
Yes. Travel control.